talk about the tech driving a new green economy. And I'm joined here by four amazing speakers. I'm Diana. I'm the head of research and sustainability with GBBC, and we're going to have a conversation. First of all, the green economy is very important. And as we think of green economic growth that is socially inclusive, low carbon, and resource efficient, what are companies and organizations doing to meet this goal, which is crucial for our survival in many ways in the world we live in today? So I'm going to let you all introduce yourselves for about 30 seconds each as we move forward. So Georgia.
Hey there.
Are you on? You can be fine.
Hello.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Hi there. I'm Georgia Quinn. Thank you for having me. First of all, really appreciate it. I'm the general counsel at Anchorage Digital. We're the first federally chartered digital asset bank. We are an institutional platform that helps our institutional clients to custody, stake, participate in governance protocols, settle trades, participate, buy, sell different digital assets. And we also have a lending program that they can participate in. And looking forward to sharing some of the other activities that we're involved in.
Marley.
Hi, Marley Gray. I am, well, you can read my title on the screen. I'm with Microsoft for a new industry cloud we call the Cloud for Sustainability. And yeah, working across Microsoft and trying to bring solutions with our partners in a wide range of areas.
Hi, I'm Bruce Keith. I'm with the IFC. I work in innovation and climate finance from a more entrepreneurial standpoint than the IFC is used to, so we're still trying to figure it out. And applying technology to climate and sustainability is a critical step in the right direction. Thank you.
Great.
So I'm Gene Hoffman. I'm COO and president of Chia Network. Chia is a new layer one blockchain from Bram Cohen, who created BitTorrent, of which Bitcoin is named an homage. We are the world's largest blockchain by public node count. We peaked at around 300,000 full nodes and now have about 140,000 full nodes. And we're really focused on real world use cases, of which we'll be talking about some of those shortly.
Excellent. So as we're talking about, companies are starting to already incorporate their carbon footprint and ESG considerations into the very core of their competitiveness. What does this mean? A recent World Economic Forum article mentioned that the ultimate goal of businesses will no longer be to sell goods by any means necessary. As carbon pricing increases, the decision to sell or not to sell will be based on total company costs. Production costs will be enriched by carbon emission costs in real time. And this can determine the outcome of many deals due to the scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions and the costs that they represent. So what are your respective organizations doing to support the transition for the green economy? Georgia, let's start with you.
Great, thanks. So I know it's going to sound like really hokey, but I think probably just about everybody at my company is involved in blockchain and the digital asset space because we want to make the world a better place. Like we actually do. We get up every morning and we try to be good people and we really actually think we're helping. And so if in doing so, we end up like destroying the planet, that is going to be a problem. So, I'm a very practical person. And I'll share with you just some of the kind of practical things that our company is doing. But I really think that this definitely has a much broader policy, like reach. And I think that my fellow panelists are going to do kind of a better job outlaying that. But from just rubber hitting the road at Anchorage, we support proof of stake digital assets. So Chia being one, but that we're hoping to support very soon. But as you guys know, and I heard the other panelist was just talking about the Ethereum merge and the shift from proof of work to proof of stake. And Anchorage has been supportive. We've been involved in testing our staking program, and we intend to offer those staking services to all of our clients as soon as everything is live. And so, also supporting other proof of stake, because it's not just ETH, other proof of stake assets is very important to what we're doing. We also provide financing to miners that utilize renewable energy in their mining efforts, and we help miners to find renewable energy sources. We also have an initiative to move miners from geolocations where green energy is on the forefront of their regulatory environment to the United States, where they can access renewable energy sources. So, those are just a couple things that we're involved in, and again, it's also just a part of our ethos.
Great. Marley.
Yeah, so we at Microsoft have done a lot to try to ingrain what we're calling green economy here. But we initially started with just looking at our own house and implementing an internal carbon tax across all lines of business that we collect, and every line of business has to pay their carbon tax, so they have to account for their emissions, and they pay it in. We use that as an investment fund, so we have I don't know how many billions it is now, but it's basically being used to invest outward and both and inward to help us try to, model, find areas where the green economy is broken. And it sort of led to the formation of the product group that I'm in now, the Cloud for Sustainability. Is what are the issues that we were seeing around trying to figure out what our own carbon footprint was and how to measure that. Carbon accounting for corporates is messed up. And I just got out of a day-long meeting with a group we've helped form called Carbon Call, was just trying to figure it out. And that gets back to where, over time, as we see, the ESG and sustainability being woven into the financial fabric, such that they're so entangled for corporate reporting that we'll have the same discipline and reporting structures that we have for financial reporting. If you're a big corporate, quarterly reporting is a big, big deal. It's regulated, it's standardized data. We need to have that same footprint for ESG. We're tackling carbon first, but it's water, waste, and all the SDGs and all that
Across
stuff.
the board.
Yeah, we have to. You have to weave that in. It can't be and also we do this. It has to be a part of the business cycle, and that's what we're trying to go through first. And we're publishing and trying to say, hey, this is what we learned, and pull in and do it, because one organization can't do it all. We know that.
Exactly.
And we all have to just work together to do that. And I think that's ultimately what we're trying to get done.
Yeah. Bruce.
So our role is to support that. We invest only in developing economies, but whatever we do has to be green or climate focused going forward. So right now, our investments are about 35% green or climate focused. In the next 3 to 5 years, we have to get to 85 or 90%. Everything we invest in has to have a green or climate tag, as well as the other additionalities that the SDGs sort of guide us on, because it's just not one answer and not one approach. But all of that then is also driving technologies to deliver. So those most affected by climate change are developing countries. Those who are part of the solution, and therefore the beneficiaries of a green economy, are developing countries. So they have the means to address climate change better than most, because that's where the resources are and the means to address it. But also they should be the ones who benefit from providing that solution. So our drive is in everything green. Our single biggest barrier to any investment is not our risk or our credit departments, it's our E&S department, environment and social. So we have to prove a very high level of positive environmental impact and positive social impact. Doesn't matter how much money we can make off the project, if we can't address those two pieces very positively, we can't do the investment. And so that's what drives it.
Yeah. Gene.
So Chia in many ways exists because of concerns about ESG. Bram and I were big believers in what is cryptocurrency and blockchains, but if you fast forward into the future, what the kind of development ramp we were on, you were looking at a tremendous consumption of electricity and a tremendous e-waste problem. So Bram literally invented new math here in multiple places to figure out how to build a consensus mechanism that was as or more secure than proof of work. We applaud people moving from proof of stake. We think that's certainly better than proof of work, but we don't think proof of stake has the same level of security that proof of work has. And so we didn't want to have that Gordian knot hold things back. Proof of space and time, the idea is let's use this massively over allocated resource that it turns out there's even better resource allocation components I'll come back to use your unused space to be the thing you use to prove your work effectively. That's led to a consensus mechanism that is as secure as Bitcoin at 800 times less power annually used. That's going to get better too. One of the things we like about the storage market is we're slowly transitioning from hard drives, where you spend some electricity spinning those disks, to solid state drives, like the ones you have in your laptop. It's only a few years out, and we're talking about that 800 times maybe being 8,000 or 80,000 times more efficient. So unlike an ASIC or a GPU, you're looking forward to a world where it's only going to get greener. Now, that also led to a partnership with Bill McDonough and Seagate and Western Digital, because it turns out that hyperscale data centers like Microsoft and others have been shredding drives at year 4. So a tremendous amount of storage has been going to landfills. And in partnership with folks like Microsoft and others, we think we're actually going to be able to not just green the blockchain space, but maybe green up the entire data center business. So we're really excited about having that really massively positive impact on the totality of e-waste and electrical use in cryptocurrencies.
That's fantastic. There are so many angles to what sustainability is. And thinking through what are the key components of a green economy, Marley, could you walk us through? Is it standards? Is it requirements? Is it voluntary practices? What needs to happen for there to be a green economy?
Well, standards, for sure. We need data standards. Getting a handle on all of this is a data problem. It's hard to progress and track progress for something you can't measure. So you have to be able to, and being able to accurately measure this data requires all of us to be able to collect our data and share it openly with each other. And then we have to have trust in that data. So, establishing standards for everything, what's the format of the data, essentially schemas, is very important. And then, the exchange of that data. One of the things that big terms that has come up with in this space is to connect data, don't collect it, right? And it goes back to some of that storage stuff. Is if we get to the point where we can understand each other and have the same, I hate to use data dictionaries, but basically freely exchange this data, then these problems become solvable. At least we'll know where we are more accurately, and be able to do it not only at the individual or household level, but corporate level, national level, and then ultimately the global level. To be able to have a ledger like that, we have to have standards.
Exactly. Bruce, how does this relate to general sustainability practices overall? Customers are demanding sustainability. They're demanding verified ethical supply chains. Companies are rising to the occasion, and the consumption model of take, make, and waste is shifting toward a circular economy in the supply chains. What do you see as the major trends and opportunities at a global level?
That's a big question. I think first we're supporting this, but the second, in the sense of we work a lot in taxonomy. So if you're going to move it toward it, how do you define it? How do you categorize it? And how do you deliver it? So first we would start with, in consumer products or in financial products, the taxonomy that defines it so that the old way of thinking can adjust to the new way of thinking. So what is it? How do you track it? So if you're going to lend, somebody lending from 5 years ago has no idea about climate risk. So how do you help them define that and understand it so they can apply those definitions or those risk profiles that they weren't used to or trained on? And then you go to the consumers, and the consumers want to know. So whether it's in finance or it's in any product, they want to know, they want to follow the supply chain. So I want to know, and they want the means to know that instantly. So blockchain provides that, other technologies provide that. I mean, immediately you can find out where it's from, where it's going, what's happened to it. Is it a plastic that can be recycled? Is it a plastic that already has along the value chain a means of being brought back into the circular economy instead of dumped? You can start tracing that. So consumers want to know, there's a means for them now to have that information. But producers want to prove. say, I am doing this in this way. So again, information technology lets you do that. So again, tying all that data together and then tracking it from provenance to consumption and then beyond consumption. It's the means are there now. People want to know, we need to prove, but give them the means to do it, whether it's in finance or in consumer goods.
Great. And Jean, what is the role of energy efficient blockchains to support all this process?
Well, there's a lot of projects in the space that really couldn't move forward when proof of work was the de facto standard.
Yeah.
It'd be seen to create more carbon than you're offsetting. And that's where some of the projects we're currently doing on behalf of the World Bank were the Climate Warehouse. And what the Climate Warehouse is something using data layer, a technology we actually released to the public this morning. It's a capability to really coordinate and build integrity and transparency in a data set. So it allows people who may not trust each other to build a data set and share that data set, to leverage the strengths of a blockchain without necessarily like putting PDF files on a blockchain, which is a bad idea. And in so doing, we're enabling, for example, the Climate Warehouse to create a meta registry. So you'll have a registry of all of the, FAIRs and gold standards of the world, Japan, Costa Rica, others, so that you won't have a carbon offset that exists in two different registries. You won't have the same piece of land be the same carbon offset in the same year. That's always been a real challenge in the international community, is how would we enforce that? And the right answer is transparency, to make it really obvious if someone does something to try to cheat that system. So in many ways, that is the necessary first step, though I'd argue it's not necessarily the sufficient step finally to creating high quality carbon offsets.
Right. And in order for all of this to be possible within regulated frameworks, Georgia, how can governments encourage and support businesses creating more resilient systems? Do you think it's something about incentivizing, creating more incentives or requirements? And what's the ideal combination?
Yeah. So first of all, I'd just like to point out that we already have a lot of laws in this country. There's plenty of laws. So before we go making new ones, we need to be really thoughtful about what we're trying to do. Also, another observation, we have a lot of regulatory agencies, many agencies. So we also need to be really thoughtful about what agency is going to be promulgating these rules. Because right now we have an agency that's really supposed to be in charge of securities in the financial system, and they're utilizing their power to require disclosures about green energy and sustainability, when that may be a little misplaced. And there may be an agency that's called the Environmental Protection Agency that might have more insight into this area. And so having the proper agency with the proper expertise provide the proper regulation, I think, is probably like step one. Now, I love what Jean is talking about with respect to transparency. And I think this is where governments can utilize one of the most wonderful features of a blockchain, which is the immutable transparency, to drive sustainability. And so I think, having this kind of global accountability for your carbon credits is amazing. I hadn't heard of this. So thank you for sharing that with us. But that shouldn't just apply to carbon credits, right? That could apply to all other areas and metrics that Marley is going to develop for us that we can use to have this accountability. And then we can all share them in a transparent way where we'll all be held accountable. And then I guess the third part of this process should be when we think about sustainability, what does that sound like? It sounds like business continuity to me, right? Like, this isn't just some pie in the sky dream. This actually is, and it goes back to the thing I said at the very beginning. If my business actually destroys my planet, that was a pretty bad idea. So we need to think about what business continuity and sustainability means for the long-term goals of the company, because you can't, shoot yourself in the foot.
Exactly. That ties us to talk about carbon markets. A lot of you have been discussing the White House's recent report on climate and energy implications of crypto assets in the US, which mentions specifically that digital asset technologies could support climate monitoring and mitigation. Much of this entails what is described as environmental markets that use market-based approaches to address negative externalities. Marley, could you tell us what are voluntary carbon offset markets as opposed to regulated markets? And also, we have an interesting announcement. If you've seen, you can take a picture of the QR code on your name badges, and you can find a link to a recent paper that we just released today with IWA. It's a report that gives an overview on voluntary ecological markets. Marley, what do you hope to be the impact of this paper and the collaboration and work that will come out of it?
Yeah, that's a lot. So I'll start with, if you want to know what voluntary markets are, read the paper. It provides a really good overview. Compliance markets are, I usually say voluntary markets are easier to get started in, harder to implement, and compliance markets are easier to implement, harder to establish. I don't know, there's weird aspects. But anyway, so voluntary markets, when we talk about voluntary carbon credits, and these are essentially, the products that are intangible assets. We start talking about blockchain, and these are things that are out there. These voluntary carbon credits started evolving right after Kyoto. We're talking about the very beginning of the century. So if you think of where technology was at that time, and then how these carbon credits were created over time and the standards of establishing these products, the technology was just not there. We didn't have transparency. A lot of the stuff was manual driven. And basically how we got started on this road was our own internal process of trying to purchase voluntary credits at Microsoft to net down our effective emissions, because our goal is to be carbon negative by 2030, not net zero, it's carbon negative. And then historically negative, I call it the Terminator goal, by 2050, eliminating all the emissions we've ever emitted as a corporation. So going back to the 1970s. So to be able to make that math work, we said, well, we need to go out and source carbon removal credits and not just reductions. And that's the only way we can get to a negative position. And we think, by the way, we think the rest of the world needs to go to the same place. And then we said, okay, well, let's just go out and buy them. And well, you can't. Well, we couldn't at the time. At least do it in confidence, because we could not tell what was a reduction or what was a removal. And the confidence level of purchasing them was very low for us. And we were buying a substantial quantity. We were going to be the largest purchaser of these voluntary carbon credits for the foreseeable future, and our ramp is going to go way up. So the problem we saw was the product quality and consistency. And we needed to try to help that ecosystem create a high quality, intangible asset that you can go through and purchase through markets that have evolved over centuries, right? And because what we ended up having to do is issue RFPs, and we've done that for the last 2 years. We're doing it again this year, and that's a very costly. We'll actually arguably spend more money on running the RFP process and the team to evaluate all of these RFPs than we will on the actual assets themselves, and that's counterintuitive. What we want to be able to do is to say, here's our demand for this year. We'd like to go out to commodity markets or financial markets and purchase those like we do any other asset. And to be able to do that, we need to have standards. And the first step of getting in the standards is what that voluntary ecological markets paper does. Is it says, this is what we think voluntary ecological markets, how they should operate at a high level. Let's agree on basic things, what we call things. What's that high level process? Establish a common language so that we can speak the same language, and then basically come down to what's that data and that intangible asset that'll give buyers the confidence to spend millions of dollars on these intangible assets that they're buying to basically retire. We're buying them and we're retiring them or burning them so that they can't be used again to net down our effective emissions. But also, we want people to be able to buy them and hold them. I want to have my own risk pool. So if I buy assets that turn out to go bad and I want to replace those assets from something, I can have these assets in reserve, or you could hold them and sell them at a higher price and have it function like a financial market. So this paper, we think, this is version 2. We published the first version about a year and a half ago almost. So version 2 is a refinement of this, and if you're interested in voluntary markets and looking at it, it really is a implementation neutral approach for how you can use distributed ledger technologies to address this problem. And we're already starting to see implementations, because there will not be one, there'll be many. And those implementations, so they follow these standards, they'll be able to talk to each other, and we'll be able to share that data and make sense out of it, where we can't do that now.
And there's a huge market for carbon offsets today that's expected. The demand for verified and measurable offsets is expected to outstrip the supply. Gene, from the blockchain perspective, how do you approach the issue of incentivizing companies to adopt these solutions?
Well, first you have to get the transparency, and again, that's I think the major point behind the climate warehouse. It's not sufficient. It's not enough. It's not, is this a high quality credit? But at least it starts to get to a place where, the thing you claim to be a carbon credit isn't, if it doesn't show up in that meta registry. That's kind of step one. And we believe that one of the things blockchains are actually quite good at are building global markets that are cross-border and cross-market. So, one of the things that's nice about the kind of infrastructure we're thinking about building here is that, you may never know you used a blockchain to buy carbon and retire it. And that's the point. The point is actually to enable those markets to have a global price to bring those things together. There's going to be some experimentation. There's going to be, you may buy a registry coin, and maybe Vericoin that's got a certain class of carbon, and they've got their standards. And and ultimately it's going to be up to the buyers to sort through that. But at least now you're starting with a data set that's reliable, that is append only, that's immutable, and that makes it very clear that at least we're all having the same conversation about the same intangible object.
Exactly. And Bruce, IFC collaborates with Chia. Could you tell us more about the Carbon Opportunities Fund and what your goals are to address this issue?
Yeah, I'd like to go back for a second, just quickly to what Georgia mentioned and then Gene just mentioned. A lot of these pieces are already out there in all asset classes and all regulated classes. So why reinvent something new? So these technologies allow us to bring in a new asset class like carbon credits, but treat them like any other regular class of asset or commodity, right? And then move that back to any other asset class if we can track it on one. But for the Carbon Opportunities Fund, what it does is it leverages the Chia network and all of the benefits of what blockchain provide. And it's not crypto, it's just allowing blockchain to store the information in a very transparent and secure way. I want to know where it comes from. I want to know the project. I want to know the location. So from provenance to final consumption, and here consumption's of retirement, but if it's a different kind of commodity, it's consumption, but also not permanence. Carbon credits aren't of any value if there's no permanence behind them. So even after they're consumed or retired, they still have to have an activity. In the circular economy with other asset classes or other commodities, you also want to see that. It's not just once it's consumed, what's next with pieces of that. So that allows us, so the climate warehouse, so the Carbon Opportunity Fund is not about proving carbon credits. It's about proving that the rails and the mechanism that Gene and the folks at the World Bank built for the climate warehouse actually work, that this is real. So it's normalizing it. We know it happens, but people just aren't used to it. So is it fully transparent? Is it fully immutable? Can I really trust the information? As I said before, people want to know where things are from and all the information, and people need to prove where they're from and all the information. This is a brilliant way of having that fully transparent and open to anyone. So if you want to transact on something you're not sure about, you need the trust. This provides that. And so the fund is meant to prove that, so we can then go and invest in the projects that deliver carbon credits for the long term. Because once you're comfortable with the asset class, then you can treat it like any other commodity or asset class.
And aside from investors, when we talk about the role of regulators, Georgia, what do you think will be the role of traditional climate regulators in a world of tokenized carbon credits?
Yeah. So I think there's going to be two levels of regulators, as I mentioned before. We're going to have the regulators that make sure these are efficient markets, not with respect necessarily to the actual climate and like oracle information, I would call, but actually to, are there people manipulating the market just like people manipulate the stock market or commodities markets. So that market regulator could be one of these wonderful regulatory agencies that we already have. And then there needs to be obviously the regulation of the actual oracles and the climate information, the KPIs that we're looking at. And the great thing is the blockchain is going to do a lot of that for us. So I really think this is such an elegant solution. But I'm sure that in addition to the blockchain itself, there will be some, global regulatory body that is going to be reviewing this. Maybe the World Bank, maybe somebody's going to be kicking the tires, not sure. But I think the most important part about that is the transparency of the blockchain itself really provides a lot of self-regulation.
Absolutely. So kicking off to questions, we probably only have time for one or two. So, go. Okay, one. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I hear a lot of talk about the vaguely using the word standard. And I think that there's a large difference between standards used in financial practice compared to the scientific data standards. And sometimes those two don't align. So, Marley, when you're talking about the lack of confidence that you have going out to acquire a large amount of these markets, do you think that digital MRV will advance the confidence in that and having the ability to actually measure the impact of the performance of the underlying carbon asset or carbon equivalent? And do you think that will really drive these markets forward to give investors the confidence they need to be able to know exactly how well this asset performs versus using an outdated model or estimate?
That's a very good question. So yeah, the answer to that is we see the problem. There's two phases that we try to break this down into. One is origination of the product itself. So how does an intangible asset get created? There's a origination process, and that in techno lingo is what we call digital measurement, reporting, and verification. That that space is where we think the major quality issues. So the answer is yes. I think that is extremely important, and that's frankly where we're focusing because we think that's a all hands on deck. We need to scale supply dramatically. Distribution is a different beast, right? Distribution and how you make sure uniqueness and it flows internationally. The cool part about it is the blockchain or distributed ledger technology can solve both problems. It's just you won't have one network that does it all. We'll have a network of networks where digital MRV networks, there'll be many of those, and they might be siloed by the type of scientific standard. Is it carbon capture and storage? Is it soil, carbon, forestry, whatever it might be? You might have many of those, but ultimately we'd see those plug into the financial markets that could service them all. If we establish those standards in digital MRV where we originate products that are consistent and are easily determined, that they can distinguish themselves, like around durability and stuff like that, I think we'll be able to scale these markets. So absolutely, it's a great question. And I think that's
Excellent. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming.